Welcome to the Ring of Democracy. My name is Stacey. I'm your host, and this is my co-host, Angelica Campos. We're here today to speak and sit down with Paula Villescaz, who's running for California Assembly District 6. And we want to make sure we have a conversation with her to educate the community a little bit more about who they're voting for so they can make an informed decision when it's time to vote. So,
Thank you, Paula, for joining us today. And I want to go ahead and dive right in and ask you to tell the community who you are outside of politics and just what motivated you to run as well. But you can ask the first question first.
Well, thank you, Stacey and Angelica, and it's my pleasure to be here. And thanks for providing the forum. Fundamentally, who I am. I think the top of that definition, especially right now, is I'm a new mom and I'm a working mom, and so just figuring out how to juggle everything and make sure that my daughter is doing well, making sure that the house is in order, the bills are paid, juggling the job, the baby, the campaign, etc. It's quite a bit, but at the top, I love being a new mom and just the new perspective that brings on to everything. But in addition to that, just like the sense of urgency that I feel in tackling a lot of the issues that I want to tackle as a public servant. And so in addition to that, to be honest, I'm just a workhorse. So who I am is the job as well. And it's the career. But what really kind of drove me into public policy as a whole and the work that I do is sort of my own personal story and my family background. A lot of that drives the work that I do now. I was raised by a single mom. I never knew my dad, and growing up, things just were not easy. She worked multiple jobs to make ends meet. I started working as soon as I could get a work permit so that we could make sure that all of the bills were paid for, and the constant juggle of making sure that the bills were paid off, but that we had groceries or the luxury of a full tank of gas, which was rare growing up, right? And just always knowing and feeling, particularly growing up, that we were constantly reacting to the circumstances around us. We never really had the opportunity to sort of choose what we wanted to do. It was constantly a reaction to the car breaking down or scheduling challenges for my mom and her jobs, or what have you, the rent going up, being evicted, all of that kind of created and left me with a constant sense of uncertainty growing up, in particular, especially when you get into sort of growing up housing insecure and not always knowing what comes next and what challenges are on the horizon. So a lot of that really defines who I am and the work that I do now. And it's why I am, proud to work in public policy, because as I've grown up, I've been able to realize that a lot of the challenges that we face and that a lot of families face, they're policy decisions, right? And you have to make sure that people with that lived experience are making those choices. But it's because of the fantastic schools that I went to that I was able to also be a first generation college graduate. I'm the first in my family. And so that was able to make that leap. And so I'm very proud of that work as well. So that's a little bit about me.
All right. Well, thank you, Paula. I have a follow-up question about that. Now, you mentioned that it's important for individuals with the lived experience to work in public policy. Can you explain to community members what in the world is public policy? How does it affect their day-to-day to ensure that they know how important voting for that position is?
100%. And it's something that, I had to sort of realize as I became a young adult as well. I don't come from a politically inclined family. I'm sort of the outcast that went into politics and government. My mom voted for the first time in 2008 because I registered her and I said, "You're voting in this election." And so a lot of that was the sort of realization that when I talk about public policy and choices, everything from whether or not there's a bus stop across the street from your house or your apartment complex, or there's potholes on the car, on the roads that you drive, to decisions like how many hours you get at a job, and if those are consistent hours, or what kind of benefits you might get, right? The price of gas, how much your rent goes up in a year, how expensive housing is, right? There's like really micro level things, everything from the traffic lights not working on the corner to really, really big things like the cost of, what it costs to buy a home. And all of these are informed by people who are making decisions on our behalf every single day. Whether it's your local county planning commission, whether it's the county board of supervisors, whether it's the city council, or more importantly, for my interests, whether it's the state legislature, right? The legislature passes hundreds of bills every year, and all of them have a direct impact on big and small things, but ultimately on the everyday lives of individuals, and recognizing, right, that growing up, that people who grew up in the circumstances that I did weren't always at the forefront of those decisions, and in fact were often harmed by those decisions, was a big part of what has really motivated me in terms of getting into a public policy space and making sure that we are seeing the outcomes that we want to see for our successful communities.
Well, thank you, Paula. Thank you for sharing this. It's really important for folks to understand what policy is, because oftentimes people look at the ballot and have no idea what the positions are or what the different, who they're voting for. So thank you so much for taking that time.
Thank you, Paula, and thank you for addressing the various things public policy affects. And one huge thing in our community that's a concern is the housing affordability. So one question I have for you is, how do you envision making housing more accessible to all residents in District 6 Assembly?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And it's really hard for me to separate our housing challenges from our growing homelessness challenges. To me, they're very intertwined, and I think about them on a spectrum. And I also fundamentally think about them as a series of failed public policy decisions, right? And so when we think about that spectrum, and, this is a top priority for the consideration of, what this legislator will do for our community here in Assembly District 6. But, I have a background in health and human services. And so I always start from a prevention side, which is on one end of the spectrum, right? It's, we have a lot of challenges around housing and homelessness. And fundamentally, let's not make the problem worse, right? We know that there's a way for this problem to continue to grow, and we haven't really addressed that, which is that seniors and individuals living with a disability in particular, and really anyone on a fixed income, they can't keep up with rising rents. They can't keep up with rising housing costs. And so they are at the top of the list and at the front of the line of individuals who are most likely to become homeless. And so first and foremost, how do we keep individuals currently housed in their housing settings and make sure that they can have the capacity and the resources to afford their rent, is one part of the spectrum. And then there's the piece and kind of the piece of the puzzle where there's a lot of individuals who have become unhoused and need extra support in some way, whether it's mental and behavioral health services, whether it's job training services, whether it's additional income to help be able to afford housing, right? And so making sure that we are building out the right systems to serve that group of individuals is absolutely a top priority. And then there's the question of, okay, well, how do you make housing more affordable across the board, right? Because that solves a number of different challenges, but ultimately is the goal, is to, we have fundamentally have an inventory crisis and just not enough places for people to live. And so we, on that end of things, we absolutely have to build more across the board, build more housing of all kinds, not, luxury housing should be, towards the end of that. We need to make sure that we're building out affordable housing, middle income family housing. And then, at the top end, typically what gets built first is that, more luxury housing, because it's built around incentives for, making money. And so making sure that the full spectrum is met is a top priority.
Thank you. And I actually do have a follow-up question related to housing from a community member, because you kind of talked about, these luxury apartments. That's a huge concern for people in our community. This question's from Ty. He asks, what will you do to stop major corporations and investment funds from buying up single family homes and artificially inflating prices when inventory is already tight? Some believe that building more homes is a solution, but that's one side of the equation. We must address supply as well as demand, he said.
Absolutely. And there was recently some work being done by the Attorney General and taking action against those companies that are just buying up that inventory to hold on to them and take advantage of the crisis that we are in. And the legislature has had a couple of cracks at an attempt to stop that practice and say you can't just buy up a housing inventory and let it sit vacant. And so I look forward to, picking up where the legislature currently is at and making progress towards saying, corporations can't just buy up our inventory, making sure that there is availability for people who actually live in our communities to instead purchase those properties, but also make sure that, people can afford everyday people can afford to buy them, in the first place.
Well, thank you for that, Paula. And I know you just mentioned you want to make sure that people can afford purchasing those homes if they are available. And the one thing that's very important when we talk about affordability of homes is having good jobs, economic opportunities, and workforce opportunities. It's very well known that you support labor in unions, right? So in the assembly, how will you work to protect and enhance workers' rights?
Yes, I've been a fierce champion for workers' rights across the board. And, for me, my partnership and collaboration with labor in particular, it's not just a tagline. Like, we are a union family. We believe in good jobs, and really that organized labor is the only defense of the middle class right now, of any kind of middle class or working class, really. And without fighting for that, you will quickly have, exacerbate what we have now, which is, a quarter of the individuals in this country holding 90% of the wealth, right? Which is completely backwards. But I would continue to fight on behalf of workers. I mean, continuing to make advancements, like things like fair scheduling was huge. I recall specifically growing up when I was in high school. I was a junior in high school, and we were talking about different professions. And it was the first time I'd ever had a discussion with anyone that made me realize that there were salaried jobs. Like, I had only ever grown up in a universe where people were valued by their hour and ability to work for an hour and an hourly wage, right? And that was my entire framework. And so calculating, even if my mom did work 24 hours in a day, and realizing that she could do that and she tried to do that, it still would not be enough to make it. Those were the circumstances within which I grew up. And that's why I know that you should be able to have one job and be able to make it and be able to have somewhere to live and pay for your bills and pay for your groceries. And so there's a whole wide range of ways to ensure that we're supporting workers across the board, and women in particular, which helps strengthen our families across the board. But it's everything from ensuring that people are being paid a livable wage, that people are being paid appropriate benefits, that we continue to preserve what we can on the, defined benefit plan to make sure that people can, retire and have those promises kept, and, increasing jobs that have things like pensions, which are quickly going away, are all ways to protect workers, in addition to bringing down the costs of a lot of other items, such as the cost of healthcare, the cost of basic goods, which continues to go up. There's a lot of ways to continue to support workers across the board, and I look forward to taking that on as a member of the legislature.
Okay, Paula. And, while we're on the topic of supporting, workers, also there's a lot of small businesses in the area of District 6. And one question I have is, how do you plan to support these small businesses? especially after the pandemic, losing business, losing like there's rising costs. How do you plan to support small business?
Small businesses, especially in the heart of Midtown and downtown, but really throughout all of 86. They're absolutely key and vital and make up a lot of the character of our communities. When I first got started, me and my team did business walks in Midtown and downtown to really understand, what are the challenges that small businesses are seeing here in our community and how do we support them? And of course, at the top of that was challenges around having individuals who were unhoused in, around their businesses and the challenges with security and staffing and that all of that creates. And so, want to recognize that that's at the top of mind for a lot of our local business owners, and tackling that solves a whole lot of problems across the board. But in addition to that, there are a lot of resources now that exist between the city, between the affinity Chamber of Commerce groups, right? Like the Sacramento Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and the Black Chamber of Commerce and all these groups. There's a ton of resources. People just don't always know where to find them. And those resources are vital in being able to sort of cut through the red tape and be able to navigate and get the right type of permits that you need to, sell goods or, have different activities take place in in the job or rather in the business that you're looking to create. And so we heard a lot of just help. We would love help in better navigating the local jurisdictions that regulate a lot of our small businesses to help kind of remove that red tape and help them navigate the process. And then in terms of what can be done from the state level, right? Startup grants that we hear a lot about, just the initial startup costs, like a small business will pencil out in the out years, 3 years, 5 years out, but it's that startup cost that's the hurdle. And how do you, help make that initial investment so that businesses can get off the ground and thrive? And that's really where the legislature comes into play in terms of offering, initial capital grants, et cetera, to help support those small businesses getting off the ground so they can thrive.
Thank you. That sounds very promising, and we would love to hear more about that and how in the legislature, because then with the startup grants and capital grants, what would be the process to get something like that started to help small business owners?
I know there's been some efforts through entities such as Go Biz. And so I will say sometimes, and really a big part of the role of a legislator is to make sure that, you can get something budgeted or get something passed. And it doesn't always get implemented the way we intend it to be, but oftentimes passing a bill or securing funding is like 10% of the job, and then making sure that things are executed well and people know that they're being, that they're out there and they're available is the other sort of 90% of things to really making things become real. And that's something that I learned as Assistant Secretary for Health and Human Services Agency, working within the administration where you're actually administering programs and trying to get these resources out to individuals altogether. But there are programs through GoBiz and efforts, and that's an arm of the administration and run through the governor's office. And so that would be sort of a venue to working in collaboration and making sure that funds that are available from the state are actually making it to the ground. And a lot of times you have to rely on your local jurisdictions, right? So something in partnership with the city of Sacramento or other business improvement plans and groups and different individuals already kind of doing a lot of this legwork in the community that just need those resources would be how I would go about that.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
And earlier, pivoting something you said earlier, mentioning the potholes or like how far a bus is from like where you live. So that's one thing I wanted to ask is, could you discuss your vision for transportation and infrastructure in our district?
My vision of transportation and infrastructure for this district is that it's something that's reliable and that has the resources to be more intentional in terms of the population served. And this is actually something, that one, just currently, as a, environmentally conscious person, I have sort of mapped out going from my house to downtown. Like, what would that look like using regional transit? And it would take what is a 20-minute endeavor and make it a 2-hour endeavor, because there's at least 4 different transfers that have to be made. And that would assume that everything is running exactly on time. And so that's my own individual experience, but also putting on my school board member hat. I'm proud to serve as a school board member in the San Juan Unified School District. And a lot of that is the Eastern County of Sacramento, but there is some part that's incorporated, and it's all regional transit resources and infrastructure. We have a lot of students who rely on RT to get to school in a safe manner. And a couple of years ago, RT was looking to expand and maybe move around some lines, and seeing, we, first of all, as a school district, we weren't really brought into that conversation, but there wasn't a whole lot of discussion of what that would mean for, East County communities in particular. But had they asked, and eventually we were able to establish a partnership, but there are, high density locations around apartment complexes, et cetera. And there are routes that people would use more frequently if available, that would take individuals, from that high density housing to other resources, whether it's their jobs, whether it's the library, whether it's other healthcare services, et cetera. But fundamentally, it has to be reliable. Like, the thing that I heard more, that I hear most often is that, a line is down for the afternoon or for the day. And the unreliability of regional transit is really one of many things that makes the real use of public transit in Sacramento and in the city of Sacramento a barrier and a challenge. People have to be able to make it to work on time, right? And so they're not going to do that if they don't trust that the bus isn't going to come. However, if we were able to invest more and make sure, that all of the staffing needs were met, and that we were able to create more routes that would be heavily utilized and increase riders and increase that usership, then I think more and more individuals would try to ditch the car every once in a while and take RT to their job every once in a while.
Thank you for sharing that, Paula. Now, I think we have time for one more question. So my question for you is in regards to the diversity of the district, and especially Sacramento. Now, how do you plan to represent those different communities, underrepresented folks, and ensure that they're participating or in this process to ensure that the policies that you're working on, they work for them?
Well, fundamentally, everyone knows that the role of a legislator is to pass bills. And having worked for the legislature before as an aide, I would say just as important, if not more important, is the convening power that comes with the office to be able to bring together jurisdictions, or more importantly, bring together communities from around the region. And say, what's working for you and what's not working for you. And this is a really important question when we consider that to date, 10% of people have voted in this election, right? Civic participation, at least in one of the most critical measurements, which is voting, is way down. And so there are many, many ways, but you have to go out to the community where they're at to ask these critical questions, and you have to earn their trust. You can't just show up and expect them to, come and engage immediately. It takes time, and it takes frequent engagement and genuine dialogue. And this is something I've learned to be able to do as a school board member in the San Juan Unified School District. San Juan has everything from Arden Arcade to Orangevale, which could not be more different types of communities, from, an urban setting to a rural setting to, to the diversity that exists within each community. But San Juan is a very, very diverse district across the board, and earning the trust of individual communities so that they were able to, meaningfully share feedback and what they'd prefer to see, or what might impact them in a more positive way is a skill I've been able to learn really well as a school board member. And it's a practice that I would continue to take on as a legislator. There's actually a really unique benefit of being the legislator from Sacramento, which is that I don't have to hop on a plane to go home. I get to just drive down 80 and be with my constituents and be with the community, or, drive down 50, although right now I would not drive down 50. I avoid it like at all costs. But my point is, right, this is the community. And so it's that much easier to be out and about, be everywhere, be at the community groups, but also play that convening role to approach communities and ask, how do we meet your needs? And specifically, how do we convene partners? Because the legislature is not going to fix everything overnight. And in fact, oftentimes, like the last thing you need is someone, from the legislature. But there might be a nonprofit or a community partner in the area that is trying to, is doing really, really incredible work and just needs more help engaging with the community. And we see that all the time on the school district level, and being able to amplify the work that people are doing and really tie the, connect those dots for everyone is a big part that the office can play as well. And I look forward to the opportunity to play that role.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate your answer and kind of figuring out a little bit more about your thoughts on engaging the community and increasing civic participation. So thank you for that.
And we want to be respectful of your time and wrap up, but leave you with this last moment or so, or last minute, to leave the voters with why they should vote for Paula Villescaz for Assembly Districts.
I appreciate that. And I would suggest that I'm the candidate with the lived experience, but also the professional experience, having worked both in the building and engaged outside of the community, to really continue to deliver results for our community. As a school board member, I've been able to bring $12 million to our district to help fund programs to support newcomer families, to help expand our career technical education, and all of that required knowing how the legislative process worked in order to deliver for my community. And so I've got the personal experience that really matters and is what grounds my values that are, the values that I share with our community here in the district. I've got the professional experience that's really important. And then, now I've got this new perspective as a working mom, which brings an urgency to solving a lot of the challenges that we face. I'm not used to backing down from any kind of challenges or fights. And we have a lot of things we have to tackle, from housing and homelessness to our climate crisis, to making sure that, everyday people can make it on one job and be able to provide for their families. And so all of this is, taken on a renewed urgency now as a relatively new and working mom, to make sure that we're delivering for our communities. Thank you. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Paula. And to close, first thing I'm going to say is that the Ring of Democracy is a non-political, nonprofit, nonpartisan, and we're here to democratize the electoral process and bring you these candidates during the sit down so they can tell you a little bit more about themselves so you can make an educated choice. And
please vote.
Yes, please vote on March 5th at the primary. So if you haven't dropped your ballot off yet. And thank you again, Mrs. Paula Villescaz, for being here today and taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for the important work that you're doing. I know we're going to be able to move that 10% up from, hopefully come election day. So